Welcome to the Final Four of North Carolina Farm Bureau's Young Farmers and Ranchers Discussion Meet. I am Lindsay Gay of Greene County of the North Carolina Farm Bureau's Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee. I will be serving as room chair for this round. At this time, I ask out of respect for all the competitors that each of you turn off your electronics. Also, please keep distractions as minimal as possible to allow the concentration of the competitors not to be broken. Serving as moderator for this final round is Kevin Wilson from Yancey County. Serving as timer for this round is Hunter Casey of Wayne County. The winners of the opening rounds have advanced to this final round. The topic is, American agriculture depends on a foreign-born labor force. How would you draft a national immigration policy? The judges, timer, and competitors have been briefed as the rules of the competition. I yield control of this competition to your moderator, Kevin.
Thank you, Lindsay. We appreciate all of you for taking the time to attend this competition. Your support is appreciated by the competitors. Competitors, please come take your place up front. Writing is allowed after all competitors have been seated. As the room chair has mentioned, the competitors have been briefed on the competition and realize that their general discussion should be directed towards each other rather than the audience. In my role as moderator, I will not attempt to control or direct this discussion. Remember, the discussion meet is meant to simulate a committee meeting, not a panel discussion with point, counterpoint, and an active moderator. As such, I will not intervene unless or until disparaging or inappropriate remarks are made. With that in mind, the burden is on the competitors to moderate themselves and conduct themselves in a cooperative and congenial manner. Competitors, congratulations on your advancement to the final round. The competitors for this round are Jessica Morgan, Russell Hedrick, Abby Hucks, and Jeff Broadway. We will begin the discussion with the 30-second opening statements from each competitor. Following the opening statements will be 25 minutes of open discussion, followed by 1 minute of quiet time for the competitors to prepare their 1-minute closing statement. Competitors, in voluntary order, make your 30-second opening statements. Please stand and direct your opening statements to the audience. The timer will indicate when your 30 seconds have elapsed by standing. You may now begin.
Over the years, American farms have changed in terms of size, structure, and technology, therefore making family labor, which is often unpaid, insufficient for operations. The low wages and physical demands of farm workers make it increasingly difficult to find quality domestic labor. Therefore, farmers are forced to utilize a foreign-born labor force. However, most of the foreign labor has entered the country illegally and is unauthorized to work in the U.S. An effective immigration policy is needed to ensure that both farmers and workers act in a legal way to meet their needs.
I think all you had to do was look at the election, ads prior to the elections November the 8th to see just how controversial an issue and how important an issue immigration is to our country, from the West Coast to the East Coast, and it certainly affects agriculture both here at home in North Carolina and across. We certainly cannot get away from, nor should we, get away from a foreign-born labor source, but we do need to sit down and have a realistic discussion, and I look forward to that today with my peers here, into how we do that is fair to the farmer and fair to the workforce at the same time.
In 2016, there was nearly a foreign-born labor force of 12 million people in the United States. We have to look at a way to work with this new administration to come up with an effective way to not only move these people economically, but also socially. There's a huge divide in our country, like our counterpart had talked about through this last election, of how we can effectively move people to help the agriculture industry, not only in North Carolina, but the United States.
I believe that everyone in our country understands the need for our federal government to address our immigration policies. For us in agriculture, it's imperative. In North Carolina, we understand the importance of a foreign-born workforce and what that means to our economy. We are operating in a broken system that hasn't had federal legislation passed since the Reagan administration, and that's before I was born. I look forward to discussing with my competitors here today what we can do to look at national immigration policy and the importance of it to agriculture.
You have heard the opening statements. Competitors may now proceed with the discussion. Competitors, please direct your discussion to your fellow panel members.
You know, Jeff, you brought up a great point whenever you talked about this year being an election year, and I think immigration was a very hot topic in the election this year. I know, you know, they've been talking about this wall that President-elect Trump wants to build, so it is a big deal that we need to address now.
And you brought up a good point, Abby. I mean, I think border security is one of the main components when we look at a national immigration policy. It's concerning to a lot of Americans, and I believe that it's something that definitely needs to be addressed.
One of the things we think about with immigration is mostly our southern border. Actually, only about 51% of our foreign-born labor force comes from that region. The other 49% actually comes from overseas. In North Carolina last year, we had about 150,000 immigrant workers under the H-2A status. And as a farmer myself, one of the issues that we see is we have to pay for those people to go both ways, transportation and a lot of things. And I think one thing we could discuss today is maybe how to share that burden with other farmers to make that work on a smaller
I think you're
scale.
absolutely correct in that, and I think we would all agree that border security is certainly one of those topics that would be in consensus amongst the four of us. I think it seemed to be in consensus amongst quite a bit of the population. One thing that we run into, certainly here in North Carolina, as you move across the state, is seasonal versus year-round. The need for seasonal contract labor versus year-round contract labor. You can't just have workers that are here for a little bit and disappear, or send them whether they go back or regardless of where they go, and yet bring them back. If we're going to take the time to train them and take the time to put the investment in them, then at the same time we need to figure out a way to keep them here on longer terms.
Because the seasonal employees, they're great for some aspects of agriculture in North Carolina, especially those crops that we do need an increase in volume of employees during harvest, like sweet potatoes. But there's a lot of other aspects of North Carolina agriculture that do depend on these year-long workforces, such as our hog industry, dairies, poultry. A lot of our livestock commodities depend on a lot of foreign-born workers.
I definitely agree with y'all. That's a very good point. But I think before we start getting into too much, we need to talk about how we're going to go forth with it now, based on what's already in place. And what you've got right now is you've got a lot of unauthorized workers working on these farms, and they're talking about, sending everybody who's unauthorized back to wherever they came from, but we can't do that right now, because right now our agricultural sector, it depends on those experienced workers, and once you get rid of those experienced workers, it's going to be hard to get somebody back that knows what they're doing. So there needs to be two aspects to what we're talking about now. We need to do something with the experienced workers that are unauthorized at this time, and then we need to make a new program for new workers to enter the country also.
Abby, I think you're exactly right there that not only do we have to look at this economically, but we also have to look at this as a social aspect of these may be undocumented workers in the United States, but we also have to think about the children that they may have had here that are U.S.-born citizens that we can't send their parents home without nobody here to watch their children. And economically, North Carolina just couldn't sustain, losing that labor force. As far as our policy goes, I think that we've got to find a way to draft a policy that instead of sending people back to a foreign country, we have to utilize the system we have in place now to get those documents to them while they're still in this workforce.
And Russell, you brought up a great point about the social aspect issue, and no offense and not to get too political here, but President-elect Trump just said send everybody back, and that's not realistic for the time period that we live in. So coming up with a solution, like Abby said, about whether that's an adjustment of some sort for the unauthorized workforce that we have here in the United States. An adjustment like that hasn't been done since the 80s, and really not a whole lot of, no legislation has come forth from the 80s. So then in the Reagan administration, I think they granted 3 million citizens access as legal U.S. citizens, and we know it's only grown exponentially since then.
I think 2 points to kind of tie in with this. One, we got to be careful that it doesn't get called amnesty. because about the ones that are going to be against it are going to tie the word amnesty to it, and that's going to be a no-go when you get into the political arena. The other point, Russell, I'm glad you mentioned the economic values. There a lot of the current guest worker program. There are additional burdens that go with it. You mentioned getting them here and back, but also housing, transportation. There's a lot of, and then if we start to regulate, or if a regulation is put into effect to help with a minimum wage, we don't want to tie the hands of the producers that are using it. If we get it to the point where it's too cost prohibitive, then they won't need to hire them, and agriculture is going to be the one that suffers also.
Jeff, Jessica, y'all both make good points about the Amnesty Act in 1980. We need to make sure that we don't repeat what's already happened. And what happened back then was too many of these immigrants were granted, legalized status, and then, once they stay there a few years, they went off and got better jobs after they've been legalized to the country. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen again, whatever we do.
And I think Farm Bureau has done a very good job through lobbying and legislation that they do want a secured border, but at the same time, we do have to find a way to deal with these undocumented people.
And Jeff, you brought up a great point about the burdens that are placed on farmers, in the guest worker programs. And I think a lot of that comes down to, right now, the oversight of a lot of those programs is in the Department of Labor. And it's not being regulated by the Department of Agriculture, or at least in cooperation with the Department of Agriculture, who at least understands and can understand the unique aspects of agriculture.
One thing we'll have to keep in mind with that is that, at the end of the day, we all think of agriculture on a day in and day out basis. That's how we make our living. That's how we feed our families. That's how, we interact with the population. But at the same time, there are other industries that utilize the same type workforce, whether it be construction, whether it be, hotel, hospitality, whether it's, landscaping. And we, Farm Bureau can play that role of being, no, I'm not going to say middleman's not the best word, but to be the one that pulls the consensus together to help the group, because everyone needs different things, and if they're going to need them, then we need to know what we're going to come to the table with.
To add to what you were saying, Jeff, I totally agree, and I think, Russell, you had mentioned Farm Bureau and their policy and legislation a little bit earlier, but ultimately, that's going to start at our grassroots level. So we need to start talking about this in the counties. We need to take part in these opportunities that Farm Bureau is allowing us to get out and tell our story and, tell them what we need as far as our farms go. We can take part in some of their programs to learn how to portray ourselves to these legislators that will ultimately help us in the long run.
Well, and Abby, that's a good point, because, we've never really went to supporting a certain administration, but we do through litigation. And one of the things that we can do is, like Jeff was talking about, is, try to push, and be proactive. Don't be reactive in this. We have a new administration coming into office. There's a lot of things that we could bring to the table before they draft any kind of new immigration policy.
And Russell, I think that's a great point, because no administration so far has been willing to try. I mean, there's been tries, but nothing has been successful coming through. The Gang of Eight bill was the last one in 2013 in the Obama administration. Some political careers might have been won or lost over that, and we have to have a legislation that is willing to put forth the effort to draft a national immigration policy. And by what Jeff said, by utilizing some different special interest groups in addition to agriculture, maybe we can influence enough policymakers to get something at least started. Well,
American Farm Bureau's got the ground game already in place. They've got the integrity, they've got the reputation of being, number one, supported by their stakeholders, like Abby mentioned, and it coming from, and I think there's that understanding that it's a grassroots basis. So there's a lot of voices that are being brought through Mr. Duvall when he's on Capitol Hill, talking. And one thing, and we hear Ms. Linda Andrews talk about it all the time, Farm Bureau, we're not Democrat or Republican, we're for agriculture. We all wear an A instead of a D or an R. And I think as we move forward with it, we need to keep that in mind, and that can help build that cohesiveness and that team building.
That's exactly right. So to bring it all back together, the ultimate question that we were asked was, how would we draft the national immigration policy? So pretty much from what we've said here, you know, we need to talk about what we've already got and what we need to change, but also keep the same to not interrupt our agriculture sector at this time.
I think right now the system you're talking about is more of a difficult system for people to be able to move. The flow of the system is kind of congested when it gets to the end. And like you were talking about, I think for this, you know, for a new immigration policy, we've got to find something that, you know, not only works economically for us, but also for the social aspect, and also just a general view of how do we want to treat other people and make this as fluid as a transition as we can.
Well, another aspect that we've not really touched on as of yet, but you know, those that live closest to the border, you know, how it affects them. You know, the day pass type visa, the day visa type, you know, workers that are coming in, they're working during the day and they're going back into Mexico or you know, wherever they're heading to. But we've got, you know, so that's a component of it we've not really touched on yet.
And I think a big component of that is addressing these guest worker programs, whether it be the seasonal workers that we already have now, fixing that system that we have, like Abby mentioned, but also looking at our permanent guest worker program for our long-term labor needs.
You hear a lot of talk about, you know, well, you know, undocumented can go to the back of the line, or, you know, working through. And I think part of that has to come into play. Just this past week, I was able to hear from a lady that had a gentleman working with her for close to 15 to 18 years. And during that whole time, he had been working on getting his citizenship. And so I think there's that desire. And I think when you look back, you know, back at the election, that you saw a difference in the folks that had come here legally and that were trying to protect their way of life, and then those that were taking advantage of a system. And we do want to, the U.S. is certainly known for its generosity. It's known for its willingness to help someone get a hand up. And we don't want to stop that. We want to, you know, I mean, we understand that there's different environments in different countries, you know, and if somebody wants to better themselves, we need to help them do that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. We do need to have a way to let those folks that are willing to work come into our country and work to make a living.
And kind of building on what Abby said, you know, people that do want to come in this country and work, they're doing some of the hardest labor that we have working in agriculture. And just to give you an idea, in North Carolina alone, every H-2A worker that comes here adds $11,000 to our agriculture revenue. And when you start looking at 150,000 people, that is a lot of revenue for the state.
And Russell, I think you bring up a great point, because a lot of times you hear people saying that our workforce that we bring in from foreign-born sources, they're willing to do an honest day's work for an honest day's wage, and they feel a real need in the agricultural sector, especially in North Carolina.
We also need to consider the high-tech labor. You know, because we're not just talking about the get your hands dirty, you know, and working all day. There's also those that, and because different people bring different skill sets in. You know, there'll have to be a portion of the immigration reform that deals with high-skilled labor and that need.
In federal government, you know, we're talking unskilled versus skilled labor forces. And in agriculture, we talk a lot about unskilled forces. But when we talk about a whole comprehensive national immigration policy, we are talking about, you know, a lot of people who are overseas and coming to this country and getting an education and then staying as a skilled labor force.
Well, and as she was saying, you know, we only look at this as the work aspect. You know, think about this is a person coming to this country that has no idea what our culture is, how we operate, how we do things. And I think our immigration policy really needs to look at how can we bring somebody from a foreign country to the United States and assimilate them into our culture so that we don't have some of the social issues that we have as well with
but
some of the
without an
immigrants.
Undue burden on our social programs.
I agree. You know, it's a catch-22 that you've really got to pay. You know, somebody has to be at the forefront of this to really pay attention. But you know, that's going to be one of the hardest things, I think, you know, coming up for the new administration.
And getting the willingness to work on it. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, because those that are going to, like I said, and that's where I think we go back to Farm Bureau being the key component in that, and talking to the fruit producers in California, the fruits and nuts growers there, to the cattle producers, the large integrated poultry and swine operators through the Midwest, and even in here as well. And certainly looking just at North Carolina, how diverse we are from the East Coast to the mountains, and then the needs there. You know, but being able to pull all those stakeholders together. and have that sit-down conversation.
You have to appreciate the legal assistance up on Capitol Hill sometimes, because that's a lot of special interest groups, knocking on a lot of doors and coming to visit a lot of our legislators, and for them to start even the process of writing, of drafting a policy, it's a cumbersome thing. I mean, I know obviously we focus on the agricultural aspects of it, but we're just one of a group that wants to push for national immigration reform. And, we're looking after our best interests just like everybody else.
That's right. But, like I said earlier, it is a grassroots thing. We got to start from the bottom. And North Carolina being so big in tobacco and sweet potatoes, those are labor-dependent agriculture commodities, so we play a big role in these foreign-born laborers, and we need to get out there and have a say in what's being done, and why that's so important for us to speak up and learn how to talk to these legislators and learn just to know what needs to go into a policy itself.
And I think that's why it's so important just to know the Farm Bureau office and to know your Farm Bureau lobbyists. And, if you have personal stories about, how burdensome H-2A is and what, you as your farm, just not economic hardships, but you almost have to have, a single person dedicated to the paperwork and the legwork behind it. So, making sure that your story's heard when you have that when you have those burdensome regulations from the federal government.
Russell, should we be looking at thought crossed my mind, we all talk about market-driven solutions and letting the market kind of dictate and have a say in it. How could we incorporate, or should we incorporate, a market-driven type solution to H-2A or to like guest workers and at the end, immigration reform?
I think it is a market-driven system already for the most part, because if you look at it, where are your highest labor needs, your highest commodity crops? Like she said, sweet potatoes, tobacco, they're going to produce, revenues that are probably double or triple what corn and soybeans are that you can simply get in a machine and go combine. I think we do need it to be a free and fair market, but at the same time, if you have a tobacco grower that grows 10, 20 acres of tobacco, it's hard for him to compete for the same H-2A workers that somebody on 1,000 acres does, because they have to guarantee them 40 hours a week of work, and they have to do all the transportation and those needs. And really, I think in our immigration bill, we really have to look at how can we pool our resources together and utilize what we have.
And I think a market driven in a different way. And you go to commodity prices, and I think about free choice. Free choice for that individual in their guest worker program to be able to make their decision on where they want to go work. I think that's an important aspect of the program that I think we haven't discussed yet. And I also want to talk about going back to the Department of Agriculture oversight on this. I believe that's super important because they understand the unique aspects of it, and making sure that this guest worker program, let's put some meat down to it.
To build on what you said, Jessica, I think that's a good idea, letting them have their choice of where they want to work, but I'm not really sure if that is the optimal choice, because there would be certain areas, that they would prefer to go over one another, and especially if like wages were different, of course they're going to opt to go to the one with the most wages. So with that being said, I think it would be best for the wages to be kind of even, and choice on some aspect, give them a little bit of choice, but not necessarily, we don't want them to go to all in one industry and have nobody over here in tobacco. I
think with that has to come a commitment part on the part of the worker, to commit to a certain amount of time, whether it's going to be, like the seasonal, or whether it's going to, if I want to come in and say I want to be here for the next 10 years, and and I think that benefits everybody. The other part of it too, talking about the how can we accommodate smaller producers that may not be able to provide 40 hours a week? Should we be able to, or can we work it in? And I think we can, and how they could share, some sharing of employees, and maybe sharing of the cost too, to where we can have, I guess, more application across the board.
And I think that's where I go back to being a free market society, right? I don't want to get into, so socialist of an idea on this that we start to dictate what farmers can and can't do. In my mind, if a farmer wants to pay $1 more a wage and that person wants to go over there, that's fine. My concern is that they stay in agriculture. You know, and I understand the aspect of it, well, I'm losing workers still, but I feel like, you know, even with the adjustments of the people that are already here that are unauthorized workers, I think making some sort of, not amnesty, but making some sort of obligation that, well, if I'm going to stay in this country and I'm going to become a legal citizen, you know, making it a, you know, obligation or some facet contract that I'm going to work so many days in agriculture, even if it's on a seasonal or temporary basis.
And Jessica, you bring up a valid point. You know, we're talking about a foreign-born workforce that we're going to immigrate, but at some point in time, these people may want to stay here. And I think that's something that we've really got to look at is, you know, if we're going to talk about building an immigration policy, is what are we going to do? How long do they have to stay here? You know, other countries have it that you have to contribute to the society for so long. You have to, you know, maintain, you know, a non-criminal status for so long before you can come into the country and actually get citizenship. And I think that's something that, you know, would be good for us to talk about as well.
And I think that's part of what Farm Bureau is lobbying for. You know, they have to meet a certain set of requirements and have to prove that they have worked for a certain amount of time in the agricultural sector in the U.S. I think that's ultimately, you know, part of the policy.
And Russell, you mentioned earlier the family aspect of it, you know, because there are a lot of children that kind of come with it, and they are born here, and they assimilate much quicker than the parents do, you know, and how we work that into it, you know, I mean, because you can't, like you said, you can't tear families apart, and nobody wants to do that, you know, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we're not overburdening systems that may not be able to handle that, you know, socially as well. So I think that's another component, you know, that's got to be addressed, and getting that part of it.
Jessica, have you had any ideas at all on legal status, as maybe how long somebody would need to stay here, or you know, I can tell you're pretty passionate about the subject.
I mean, I don't want to put concrete numbers out there. You know, I don't pretend to know everything about immigration reform, but I do believe that there are certain standards that need to be met in order to you know, start authorizing some of these unauthorized foreign-born labor sources that we have here in the United States. I believe that, you know, we need to be on the same page across the board. Even within agriculture, there's a lot of people who think very differently on immigration reform. You know, California produce growers might think a lot differently than how we do here. The definition of a seasonal and temporary worker changes based on where you are in the United States. So I know that we love to talk about North Carolina and what's really important for North Carolina and how it impacts us. But when we talk about national immigration reform, even in the agricultural sector, we have to think way beyond just us.
When you do anything else, you look at, you know, if you're going to buy something, you price it, right? You look at the different competing offers. You know, you could look at our immigration. I mean, a starting point could be looking at where we are now, but look at the countries on either side of us. You know, the Canadian type immigrations, and I'm, you know, not advocating one or the other, but also if you think about too, you know, on the Mexican side, if you go into that country illegally and they catch you, I mean, just ask the Marine that got to be a guest of the state for a while down there. So we're on, you know, we've got apples and oranges as to how different countries do it, and I think if we're going to, you know, I think to be fair and to make everybody play by the same rules, that could be a starting point.
And I think that's a great point, Jeff, just because, I mean, we are not the only country that's having this issue. I mean, yes, America, as Jeff has stated, has been generous in the past with immigrants coming to this country, especially for safety reasons, but there's other policies to look at and how they handle them. Of course, we have unique needs in the agricultural sector, but just immigration is a total. We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
That's right, because the immigration policy, like you said earlier, not only takes into account agricultural workers, but you think about hospitality. A lot of the hospitality workers in the United States are foreign-born, fast food workers. It's any kind of low-paying jobs, really. That's what they, I guess, specialize in when they come here.
Well, and part of the, you know, and we don't like to talk about it very much, but part of it is that, you know, as Americans, there are certain jobs we think are beneath us and that we don't want to do. And, you know, a lot of the farmers, you know, we have issues running into people that are willing to you know, work in hog operations, to pick watermelons, to do the hands-on labor stuff. And I think part of that, you know, and it would be tying two policies together, or at least working together, would be tying, you know, part of the welfare, you know, reform type things, you know, give people a hand up, but also have some accountability in there.
And I think Farm Bureau can serve in a lot of those roles as far as bringing everybody together, getting this consensus like we've been talking about today, and really trying to draft something up to present to the new administration so that we can actually take some of these topics that, we as farmers need, what we're going to need from a workforce.
We can certainly take the lead in that and advocating that, and as we move forward, pulling both sides of the aisle together. The country is as polarized as it's ever been, and so we have to take every opportunity we can to let's meet in common ground, and work from the middle out.
So far we've discussed seasonal versus temporary workers, Department of Labor versus USDA oversight, and unskilled versus skilled workers, and I think that's a great ending to our discussion.
Time has been called. Please prepare your closing statements. I ask the audience to remain silent for 1 minute to aid the competitors in their preparation. Please put down your pencils, and in voluntary order, please stand and give your 1 minute closing statement.
We as young farmer and ranchers, and not only citizens of a great country, we have to come to a consensus on a great immigration reform. It's been something that's been a hot topic. I've really enjoyed the discussion that we've had today. We've really got to take a look at not only the economical but the social aspect of it. We've talked about skilled versus unskilled laborers, difference in wages, and even down to the part of there's workers that want to come to this country to do better for themselves, and we've got to be able to make a home for those and be able to bring those into our culture and just really make it a good country for them to come to.
Immigration is a topic that is hotly contested, that is hotly debated, and that comes with a lot of pros and cons. I think you have to look at the impact on agriculture. I think you have to look at where we move forward to and where we have come from as we move into developing a policy that can benefit everyone. We have to look at social issues versus looking at just the seasonal versus the yearly type workers. As Russell mentioned, the guest worker permit programs versus the other areas that need the work, and we have a system that is certainly broken, but I think as we move forward together, it's a topic that we can actually make some headway in.
National immigration reform is something that our legislation needs to know that we take seriously. We've been operating in a broken system for quite some time now, and our legislators just keep kicking the can down further on the road, and it's time for us to stand up and say something needs to be done about it. We've discussed here today important aspects of it, including border security, ag work visas, including seasonal versus long-term workers that are here in the United States. And I encourage all of you that if you have these issues to talk to Farm Bureau, talk to your commodity organizations, because their lobbyists are the ones that are going to be at that table when we start to have these discussions with our legislators. I want to thank our panel here for having a good discussion.
Foreign-born labor is our key to advancement in agriculture. We have to effectively construct an immigration policy so that both farmers and workers can meet their needs. We have to keep our experienced laborers in the United States without just sending them back to their originating countries, but we also have to develop a policy to bring new workers into the country. We need to be able to bring in seasonal and non-seasonal workers, and we ultimately have to remember that this needs to start at the grassroots level. We need to get out and talk to our legislatures and policymakers about reforming immigration.
Let's show these competitors our appreciation for a job well done. At this time, I will return control of this competition to your room chair, Lindsay.
Thank you, Kevin, for a well-run competition. The judges for today's competition are Dr. Sandy Maddox, Dr. Antoine Austin, and Ms. Heather Barnes. Now I would ask the judges to report with me to the tabulation room. Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, judges and competitors. We would now like for each competitor to make a brief statement about themselves and their operation.
As y'all know, my name's Russell Hedrick. I'm a first-generation farmer in Catawba County. We started out with row crop, and we've really diversified our operation the last 3 years, which include livestock, cattle, sheep, and hogs. We also have a legal moonshine and bourbon that we make in the state now. And, you know, we really try to do a lot of direct-to-consumer marketing, and one of our passions is conservation. We do try to work closely with some of the government agencies, NRCS, and our extension office to promote agriculture.
I am Jessica Morgan. I live in Anson County. I work for NC State Extension as an agriculture agent in livestock and row crops, and I have a small commercial beef herd.
My name is Jeff Broadaway. I am a veterinarian from Union County. Currently have our family has a cow-calf operation, and we maintain a herd of goats on the place. Those can be interesting creatures to deal with. And currently have the pleasure of serving as the county president for Union County.
My name is Abby Hucks. I'm a loan officer with Ag Carolina Farm Credit. I've been there about 6 years now. I don't necessarily farm myself, but I work with farmers every day. I grew up in the 4-H and FFA programs, and I have a degree in animal science.
We appreciate your support of North Carolina Farm Bureau's Young Farmer and Ranchers program and look forward to your attendance at tonight's awards ceremony at 8 p.m. in Guilford ABC.